So over the last 3 months, we've had 150 DIY retirees reach out to us and ask for a financial plan. And there's been a number of different blind spots. We'll get into those at some point. But I think one of the most surprising blind spots that a lot of people just fail to realize is, what does success really look like, particularly when it comes to my Monte Carlo, right? Everyone's shooting for that 100%, or at least they tell us they are. But is that really the goal? Maybe for some people it is. Maybe for others it is or shouldn't be, depending on obviously their goals. But let's talk through what our opinion is of that as certified financial planners that do this all day, every day, what you should actually be looking for there. Because I think that's a gray area and it's a question we get asked almost all of the time.
Yeah, and it's been really informative to go through all these plans and review them with folks. And one thing that it's taught us is most people look at 100% as the goal. They want a success rate of 100%, something that almost guarantees they'll make it through retirement without hiccups or without running out of money. The truth is, though, if you have a 100% success rate, that means that something else has gone wrong, so to speak, in your plan. It means that you're more likely to end up with a ton of money at the end of retirement than you are to actually overspend. And it comes from a pretty fundamental misunderstanding of what we are testing when it comes to the retirement Monte Carlo analysis. Now, like anything, this analysis is garbage in, garbage out, right? So first of all, you need to have the right assumptions. That comes down to inflation, market assumptions, withdrawal assumptions, and there's a lot of other things baked in between there, but we'll kind of just leave it at that, along with the income and one-time distributions you have.
Well, let's stop there for a second, because that is another part of this puzzle piece that people ask us all the time as far as, what should my assumptions be? Now, obviously, that's going to vary for each individual based on their allocation, their timeline, risk tolerance, et cetera. But what are some of the actual, just to ballpark it, what are our ranges from assumptions from inflation and particularly rate of return?
Yeah. So typically inflation, we're going to be between 3 and 3.5% from an inflation standpoint. And that's just general inflation. You know, healthcare, we're going to inflate that a little bit higher. Education, we'll inflate that a little bit higher because that's just reality.
Right.
But for inflation right now, we would maybe even tend, if you're running this on your own, tend towards that 3.5%. Not because we necessarily think the long-term average will stay there, but because you're starting retirement, you're starting the Monte Carlo analysis in a higher inflationary environment. So it can make sense to be conservative and stay on that higher end. From an investment standpoint, it's really going to depend on what system you're using. So there's a couple of aspects to the investment piece of it. If we stay between 5 and 7% and kind of iterate off of that, that'll probably be fine. If you have a system that's using a lot of capital market assumptions that you benchmark an average return, and then there's standard deviations off of that, then you can probably bump it up to a more realistic long-term average, knowing that there's going to be more variance because of those standard deviations that are baked in. The ones we've been reviewing are off Bolden, and typically we're staying, 6-7%. Usually that's a blended average return, by the way. If it's strictly stocks, you're probably bumping that up a little bit. If it's more bonds, you're bumping it down. But we're sticking at that 6 to 7% range.
Yeah, and I think by nature where this comes from, to shoot for the 99% success rate, and then also simultaneously to shoot for way too conservative assumptions, I get it, right? A lot of these people are trying to answer the question, can I retire? And they're going to be overly conservative. For example, some of the ones that we've seen, Jake, have been as low as 2.5 to even 3% rate of return with like a 4% inflation, which is kind of crazy. If again, maybe there's a year that can happen. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But for that to happen and that to be the average over a 30 to 35 year retirement, especially if you're invested pretty heavily in the market, like that's very unlikely.
It'd be like putting it in your savings account.
Exactly. If you were to go bury it in a Folgers can, sure, maybe I have a different opinion. What people don't think is a problem that actually becomes a problem is, especially from a tax planning or an estate planning perspective, if you're that conservative and then the actual reality happens, you're going to be smacked in the face by all kinds of surprises in retirement. And although that may have felt like the right thing to do, to be conservative, it actually ended up hurting you or surprising people. And, if you're looking for a software, we have our software, Right Capital. It's what we use in our practice. If you want to check it out as well, there's a link down below. For the time being, we're also giving it away for free. So check that out. But let's go back to the Monte Carlo piece of this, because there's a lot of people that tell us, hey, Jake, hey, Kyle, I want to die with zero. That's my goal. And oh, by the way, here's my Monte Carlo plan. They're all proud. And they're like, this is my 99% chance of success. How does my plan look? It's like, well, depends on what your goals are here. Pick one. So let's talk through really what that looks like and how to make some of the adjustments and maybe also what range we should be shooting for based on our goals.
Yeah. Again, if it's a 99% success rate and we're talking about dying with zero, then I would tell you that's not a very successful plan.
Right.
Right. And I think most people, the die with zero thing from Bill Perkins, there's a lot of things baked into that. It doesn't mean you're being greedy. A lot of it's giving, enjoying things with people while you're alive. And there's a lot of good to come from that. So what we would say to that is the 99th percentile gives you a 99% chance that you get all the way through retirement without running out of money and making zero adjustments to the inputs in your plan. That's too conservative.
Right.
Way too conservative. Way more often than not, you end up with more money than you started with, or at least roughly the same amount. What the goal should be is a reasonable spending pace based on the inputs you've put in, whether that's spending on yourself, giving, helping your kids out, whatever that is for the person we're sitting across from. We need a reasonable spending pace that gets us into the 80 to 90% range. If we're running, kind of maximum income, like here's your max spending number, we're sort of benchmarking it to that 85 percentile and saying, if we follow this plan, there's a 15% chance today going forward that we have to make an adjustment to this plan at some point in retirement. We talk a lot about creating margin of safety and all of those things in our other meetings and in our other videos. But that 15% chance that we make an adjustment doesn't mean abject failure. You're homeless, you're destitute.
Right.
None of your dreams came true. That's not what that means, right? It means, hey, we had to make a shift. And maybe this year we didn't fund the 529 plan. Or maybe this year we didn't travel quite as much as we would have intended. And you can run that in a way where it puts the risk a little bit further out. You could run it towards 90, or you could say, hey, I'm a little bit more comfortable with risk. I'd like to continue growing my portfolio, and I have some other big goals that I need growth in the portfolio to sustain. You could run it closer to 80. But again, what it's testing with 1,000 or more market scenarios is really, really bad markets, really, really good ones, and everything in between. And that failure portion of it doesn't mean that you end up with zero. It means you had to make an adjustment somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and it's a great point. And the reason we wanted to bring that up today is because, and don't feel bad, because a lot of people do get this wrong. And bluntly, we've seen other financial advisors also get this wrong, where it is one of those things where, hey, I can understand the rationale, wanting to be conservative, wanting to make sure that you're going to be okay, first and foremost. That tends to be on the top of the totem pole of questions that people are trying to solve. And by nature of that, they get a little bit over conservative, and they're shooting for a reality that actually, like we've said, really isn't success, at least in their eyes. And again, it's going to depend on your situation, but for most people, 99% isn't the actual goal. In unison, obviously, too, with conservative assumptions, right? If you're getting a 99% chance of success, and then in addition to that, you have overly conservative assumptions, chances are you can retire today, right? Like that's what we end up telling a lot of these people is like, hey, you actually could have retired maybe even 2 or 3 years ago. And at that point, it's a math equation. We can do that till the cows come home. But I think it just opens up their eyes a lot as to really what's possible and the reality that they're stepping into versus maybe what they actually thought it was. So hopefully this video helped. Again, if you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure you go ahead and click subscribe.